Good morning, Brett.
Good morning, Andy. How are you, mate?
I'm good. How's the weather in Sydney?
It's absolutely beautiful. It's a perfect day in Sydney.
Yeah, well, it's a perfectly Scottish day in Scotland, raining, of course. So, thank you for taking the time to do this interview. Um,
Oh, no worries.
your new album, Dark Matter, was released only a few months ago. So, what has been the response to the album so far?
Well, it seems to be pretty good. I mean, it takes so much time to sort of get these independent releases out there and to even get people to take notice of them. I guess there's so many albums coming out all the time now that we can all record at home that it's understandable there's going to be you sort of got to jostle for position to get it out there. But yeah, the overall response seems to be quite positive.
That's great. So, just going back in time, when you were young, Brett, did you always aspire to be a professional musician, or was it something that just happened as a result of your love for playing the guitar?
No, I definitely wanted to do it for a living. I do remember my aspirations were pretty much the loftiest height I aspired to was just to get in a band, a cover band even that could, so I could at least make a living just playing music. And I didn't really mind whether it was at the most moderate level possible. I certainly didn't expect to get what I got, which was a very high level professional gig with John Farnum. So yeah, I aimed low and scored really high, so I was quite lucky.
Yeah, so obviously there was more than luck involved with your playing, I suppose.
Well, I hope so.
So over the years, your tone, I've noticed that it seems to have evolved into a rawer, warmer sound compared with your earlier sound seemed to be a little more high gain. Would you say now you have found your signature tone?
Yeah, I really like the way it's heading, and it's definitely gone in a lower gain direction. Um, I think I think I sort of the turning point was when I started playing a Telecaster. It was actually an ESP, but for all intents and purposes, it was a Telecaster. And this was back in the late 90s, like around 98, 99. And I was working with a local band in Los Angeles called Jana Music, and it was kind of a rootsy sort of a Tom Petty inspired band. And I started to move in that direction of getting back to tube amps and away from preamps and power amps, that sort of thing. Look, I guess I started using preamps and power amps back in the late 80s because I was trying to find an amplifier that would do a clean sound and a distortion sound in one package. And back then, I guess this technology was kind of in its infancy. Like amps pretty much did what they did. You either had a clean amp or a distorted amp. And the preamp introduction into the industry seemed to change all that. And then I stuck with that for quite a while, up until the mid '90s, into the late '90s, and then I happened across a Bogner Ecstasy and realized that people were making modern tube amps that could do both, and so that was when I started to gravitate back towards a real tube amp sound as opposed to a preamp power amp sort of thing.
Yeah, and the Wagner Ecstasy is a fantastic amp.
Oh, beautiful amplifier. Yeah, I still have one. That's the amp that I used for 95% of Dark Matter and Big Sky, of course. And yeah, I had no idea at the time that people were even making amplifiers like that. And I was astonished to hear it and realize it could do everything. It could do a beautiful clean sound, and it could do all the distortion tones. And yeah, so that was the turning point for me right there.
Yeah, fantastic. So so I understand that you lived in Los Angeles for a long time. Is that correct?
Yeah, 13 years. I first went there in 1989 to audition with the Nelson guys, and ended up staying there and living there until about 2002. So yeah, it was a long time there.
So so what made you decide to move back to Australia?
Um, well, times were definitely very tough in Los Angeles. Like my good friend Rick Fiorabracci and I well, I was renting a room out of Rick's house out in glorious Thousand Oaks. It was a beautiful part of the world to be in, and we were doing a gig with a singer named Jennifer Page, and this was in uh, around early September of 2001, and we had quite a bit of work lined up for us. So I'd cancelled quite a bit of touring work with her, and I'd cancelled all my teaching work and everything like that. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and that pretty much ended all of that. And so, yeah, it was pretty tough around that time. I had no real work to speak of. No one did, actually. Our whole industry just sort of imploded after the whole tragedy of 9/11. And as it turned out, in 2002, John Farnum was going to do a very long Australian tour. It was going to go for at least 6 months. And he was starting that in October of 2002, which was going to go well into 2003. So I just figured it was time to move back home. It seemed pointless to be on the road for 6 months in Australia paying rent in a place I was not even going to be in. So, yeah, I figured it was time to move back, and it was the right thing to do. I probably should have done it earlier.
Okay, so you're a happy man in Australia.
Yeah, it makes more sense for me to live here. So.
That's good. So, lots of the listeners who maybe aspire towards a career in the same vein as your own would be interested to find out what a typical week is like for you. Could you maybe let the listeners into that?
Well, I guess being part of the Australian industry, um, we don't really have the same sort of industry that they have in the US, say. You can actually you can actually make quite a good career out of just being a touring musician in the States, because there's tours happening there that last for 6 months to a year even. Whereas here in Australia, that is an absolute anomaly. I mean, that basically doesn't happen. In fact, the only guy who can tour for months at a time is Farnum, and most other bands just do spot gigs from week to week. So the thing with the Australian industry is it's a good industry, but you've got to be prepared to do a wide variety of gigs. So yeah, I could go from playing a fairly large venue with Farnham one week to doing a acoustic duo gig in a pub the following week, and so yeah, it could involve all manner of things. You just basically sit at home and wait for the phone to ring, and when it doesn't ring, you do a solo album.
So is that how Dark Matter came about? When the phone wasn't?
Well, yeah, well, yeah, you sort of have downtime, and you think, well, I should make use of myself. So yeah, so I sort of get off my backside and try and write some songs and make some music happen. I don't like sitting around too much, and I've always tried to build my own self-sufficient career. It's not enough to really support me, but that's what I've aspired to anyway.
Yeah, cool. So again, going back in time, one of my favourite releases is, of course, Centrifugal Funk from back in 1990. And I'm wondering, what was it like playing with the late, great Sean Lane and, of course, Frank Gambale?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, we never got to play together, which is probably just as well. I think I probably would have dropped the guitar and run for it if I'd really been put in that position. But yeah, I remember when I'd already been in correspondence with Mark Varney for a little while before that, because he'd heard about me through the Spotlight column in Guitar Player, and he was interested in me doing a solo album for him. But we could never really make a decision on a budget, because this was way back in the late 80s, of course, before home recording was popular. So you were either in a recording studio or you weren't. There weren't even any home studios to speak of. So the only budget I could come up with in Australia was far too expensive for Mark to really approach. So we kind of put the project on hold. And then when I ended up in America on a more permanent basis around 1990, he called me up and talked to me about the possibility of doing Centrifugal Funk. Uh, and as it turned out, I was actually sharing a room, or living with Bobby Rock, who was the drummer from Nelson. And Bobby had just received a video in the mail from Sean Lane. He and Sean were quite good friends, and it was Sean playing with a drummer at a place called the Bicycle Club, I think, in somewhere in Memphis, and man, I was just absolutely amazed. I mean, I find it hard to put it into words how blown away I was. I'd never heard anything quite like it. Probably a pretty common reaction to hearing Sean for the first time, and and then it was, yes, I was quite a shock to find out that I'd be doing an album with him not long after that. And even with Frank, like the year before that, I discovered Frank's first instructional video, and after watching it, I was amazed to see the way he utilized the sweep picking and how he would use small groupings of strings, like 2 strings, 3 strings, as opposed to doing massive arpeggio sweeps like most of the metal guys were. And I realized that like Frank was actually sort of playing more scale oriented lines using what I would call arpeggio technique with the sweep picking. And I realized that with the finger picking, I was able to incorporate a lot of these ideas straight into my playing. It was almost like someone tapped me on the head with a magic wand and said, now you can play the guitar a whole different way. So, because I already had the facility to do it, I just had to develop some ideas. So, yeah, I've really a huge debt is owed to Frank Mbali for that. He really opened my eyes to a new way to approach the instrument. Changed everything for me, really. And so luckily I got to do my solos first on Centrifugal Funk, because I think, like I said, if I'd heard the sort of stuff Sean and Frank were going to lay down, I probably would have just said I'm not worthy. So it was an incredible honor to do that album. It was really special.
Well, but you were certainly worthy. So you're talking about your influences. So for a player who's getting into the fusion sort of style of guitar playing, there can seem like so many options and roads to travel, all the different techniques and theories. And what would you recommend to maintain focus when a student's trying to approach this style of playing?
Well, I suppose sound is a good place to start. Like I was always, I mean, I guess stylistically, I'm mainly a rock blues style of player. That's sort of what I was listening to when I started to play. I dug into my older brother's record collection, which was Deep Purple and Zeppelin and Cream and Hendrix, the typical sort of stuff. And that's pretty much what's inside me when I play. That's sort of the sound I hear in my head. So I think when I started to hear fusion, it was probably made sense that I was attracted to players who were using a rock tone as opposed to, say, a clean jazzier sound. And it wasn't until much later that I started to really appreciate and be able to really get into people like Pat Metheny and John Schofield and players like that, because they were using a cleaner sound. So yeah, I really enjoyed hearing Jeff Beck and Holdsworth and then of course Scott Henderson and Frank, guys that were playing with a real good rock sound, but obviously playing fusion changes and that sort of harmony.
Yeah, I've read in several interviews where you always mention your influences: Alan Holdsworth, Scott Henderson, Frank Gambale. So how does it feel now when younger players are citing you as one of their favourite players?
It's strange, because I mean, I guess perhaps it's something to do with just being a professional musician or playing music most of the time during your day. It keeps you young. Like I still feel like I'm about 24 years old, and it's only when I walk past a mirror that I freak out and see this old guy staring back at me. But and even when I'm in a room with other musicians, it doesn't matter if most of them are young enough to be my children. I still feel like the new guy. I still feel like the guy that should be asking people questions about what the hell we're doing. And even though I guess maybe that's the case most of the time anyway. But yeah, I remember I went back to Australia in 1995, and it was for gigs with Farnum, but I was also doing some guitar clinics, and it was amazing to run into these players who were in their early to mid 20s, and they were telling me that. They said, well, yeah, 10 years ago when I saw you on TV with Farnum, it inspired me to play the guitar. And I couldn't believe it. These guys were monster players who had careers of their own now, and I realized, yeah, 10 or 12 years had gone by, and enough time had elapsed for that to happen. So yeah, it's still really trips me out to hear players cite me as an influence. I'm still not used to it at all.
It must be a very, very honouring thing to hear.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's amazing. I just yeah, it's still I still get freaked out when I see someone's mentioned me in an interview or something. I just don't expect it to happen.
So you're playing. Um, I feel there's a lot of depth to everything that you play. Um, but I read in an interview that you felt that your early playing was full of what you quoted as mindless shredding. So, do you think that this is a natural stepping stone when you're getting into technique to maybe end up being a mindless shredder for a few years before you find your own sound, or what's your views?
I I who knows what sort of mood I was in the day I did that interview, but I guess mindless shredding's a pretty harsh way to put it. But I guess I suppose the one thing none of us really start out with as musicians is any kind of technical ability. You have to develop some kind of technique. Uh, and I guess I feel like I probably overcompensated in that area. But then again, I suppose time and place too. I mean, when I really sort of hit my stride as a musician trying to develop some kind of identity for myself, it was the early '80s. So like I started playing in the mid '70s, but it was probably by the early '80s that I really became incredibly serious about it. And technique was the order of the day back then. It was people were starting to explore a new way to play rock guitar, thanks to Eddie Van Halen and Yngwie and people like that. So I guess I just got caught up with it in it like everybody else. I guess I just felt that my real strength as a musician, or what I feel the best thing I have to offer, is a sense of melody. Um, and so yeah, I feel like I sort of betrayed myself a little bit by chasing the technique thing and putting that out there. I don't think it's my strong point. Put it that way. Especially, man, when I hear some of the players coming out now, they've just got this almost bionic ability to play the guitar. I'm just absolutely shocked by what they're capable of doing. And so in the technical sense, yeah, I'm not even in the same race, but not even in the same ballpark. But it's good to. I still try to push myself to develop in a technical way. I mean, I don't feel like you can always have. I don't feel like you can have too much technique. It's great to have it. I just wish I'd been a bit more judicious in how I used it in the past. But these days, yeah, I'd rather sort of approach one note at a time and explore other things rather than just trying to play with a lot of chops.
Yeah, but of course it's always a huge benefit to have those chops there when you need them. So that,
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I mean, all my guitars are set up differently now too. Like I use much heavier strings and a higher action than I used to use in the old days, and so they're not even really set up for that kind of playing. So which I don't mind in a way. Like it forces me to think about other things. And whereas, yeah, back in those early days, yeah, light like 9 to 40 whatever strings and low action, tons of gain. I mean, they were pretty much set up to play a lot of notes. So I guess that's where my head was at.
cool, cool, Brett. So you've also released two great instructional DVDs over the years. There was Rock Fusion, and then more recently Rock Guitar Improvisation. Are there any plans for you to release more instructional DVDs?
I guess not. I've been asked that quite a bit, and the reason I did the rock improvisation DVD was initially I was going to try and reacquire the rights to the rock fusion video and re-release it as a DVD by myself. And I did approach Warner Chappell about that, and they said, "Well, no, we don't do that. We don't sell our back catalogue." And I said, "Will you ever re-release it?" And they said, "No." And so I guess it'll just sit in a vault somewhere and never be seen again, at least not as a commercial release. And that's why I thought, well, I may as well do something new and cover a lot of the stuff that was in that video. But I also added the slide guitar section to the DVD and a lot of the live footage, and there's a lot more information on the DVD than there ever was on the video. But I wouldn't want to, like some guys have asked me to do a an instructional thing about improvisation and things like that. But I mean, I've already seen Scott Henderson's video on improvisation, and there's no one more qualified to teach that than Scott. I really don't feel like there's any other subject out there. The two instructional things that I did, I felt like I addressed things that I personally do that I don't think too many other people are really exploring, and so I thought they were quite valid in that regard. But yeah, I wouldn't want to do a DVD about the melodic minor scale or something like that. I mean, there's guys out there infinitely more qualified to do that than me, and they've already done it. So yeah, unless I can think of something like that is particularly relevant and is of value to people, then I probably won't do another one.
Yeah, well, maybe in the future there's something will crop up in Brett Garsed's playing that'll call for a new DVD.
Maybe, you never know.
So I understand you're currently on tour at the moment.
Yeah, it's that's why it's quite interesting. John Farnham's doing a 25th anniversary tour of an album called Whispering Jack, which was the very first album I ever played on. And yeah, 25 years ago, back in 1986, we did that album, and we're out replaying the whole thing in sequence here in Australia, doing a national tour. So that's why it's quite interesting, because I'm approaching guitar solos I haven't played in 25 years, and it's quite apparent to me how much I've changed over the years, and in particular the sound and the style of playing. It's really, really strange to try and play lots of notes these days. Back then, it was all I did. It was I could play endless streams of notes for hours. Whereas these days the hands and the brain are saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. So it's quite strange to revisit that approach. I'm definitely putting a new twist on it, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's like a trip down memory lane.
A big time, yeah.
So is the tour going well? Having lots of fun on the road?
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's great. John's the greatest guy to work with. He's the most wonderful person and still the most amazing singer. And yeah, he pulls great crowds, and it's the biggest tour in the country by far. Every time he decides to do a tour, there's definitely nothing else that can touch it. That's for sure.
That's definitely cool. Because in the UK, there's lots of big tours all the time, so it's interesting to see how it is somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, there's obviously lots of big international tours here. All the visiting international acts, do massive venues. But as far as the local scene goes, John, over the history of his career, has definitely done the biggest tours this country will ever see by a local artist. That's for sure.
That's cool. So what about plans to maybe tour and perform some of the material from Dark Matter and Big Sky live? Is that something that you've thought about?
Well, yeah, I think about it every day, but it just always comes back to the financial situation. It's back in, when was it, 2004, I think. I did 3 supports for Steve Vai when he toured here, and it was a good learning experience for me to see just how expensive it is to tour a band, because yeah, that was just 3 gigs over the course of 3 days, and it was very expensive to move 4 people around, fly them around, put them in hotels, feed them, pay them. It was so yeah, touring's a very expensive thing. It's not even really about the musicians. I mean, I have a fusion band in Melbourne called Damage, which has got all the guys that played on Dark Matter in the band: Phil Tercio, Jerry Pantazis, and Craig Newman. And I mean, if we were going to go out and tour, obviously we wouldn't be expecting to get paid a wage. We'd just do it for whatever we could do. But it's the logistics of moving gear and flying and hotels, all that stuff. It's very expensive to tour. So yeah, unless we can get a good promoter involved who can make sure the gigs are well promoted and perhaps shoulder some of the financial burden, then it'll be tough to make that happen. But we'll be doing lots of local gigs in Melbourne next year, so that'll be at least a start.
Yeah. Well, hopefully someone wants to put some money in, and then you can bring the band over to the UK. That would be something to behold.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's why I keep, trying to do albums and trying to put my name out there, just so maybe if I can develop a large enough following, the demand would be there. It's just a question of demand, really.
Yeah. So, what other plans do you have for the future, Brett? Is there anything that you haven't already done in your career that maybe you think is time to do? Or
Well, I just love to. I guess the one thing I'd love to do is actually is do a tour. Just I'd love to be able to be out there with the band and be able to do at least a couple of months worth of gigs and see where it all went. It's sort of ironic because the when we do our fusion gigs in Melbourne, I mean, we're all so busy that none of us even have time to rehearse that music, and it's probably some of the toughest stuff we'll play. And we just rock up to sound check and sort of run a few heads and go over a few chord sections and things like that, and then we just go for it with no rehearsal. And yet, I come out to do a tour with a pop band, and we rehearse for 2 weeks before that, and we've already got the songs down after 2 days. It's like, so it's funny, the simplest stuff you rehearse for weeks, and the real tough stuff you don't rehearse at all. So I would love to be able to hear the band after, let's say, a month of doing steady gigs, because with the nature of that improvisational sort of music, that's when it really starts to catch fire and get good. So yeah, that's what I'd love to do. I'd love to, and also look, I'd love to. I always put this out there just in the hopes it might happen. I'd love to get a gig playing slide guitar for a name act. I'd love to do that. I'd love to hear my slide playing, where it would evolve after maybe a couple of months of just doing that. Because I don't practice it at all. I just play it when I'm on the gig. So I don't sit at home and practice playing slide guitar. I just sort of shove it on my finger and have a go when I'm on stage. And I just love doing it so much. But once again, I'm predominantly known for being this shredder guy. So people don't really take much notice of my slide playing, unfortunately.
that is unfortunate because I'm sure many people would like to hear your slide playing featuring heavily.
Yeah, well, I live in hope. So
Yeah. So, well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this interview, Brett. And it's been a great pleasure to talk to one of my favourite players.
Oh, thanks, Andy. Thanks so much for asking me. It's an honour.
Okay, well, you have a nice day, Brett, and I'm going to go to my bed now.
All right.
Right, thanks, Brett.
No worries, Andy.